Square. Hopefully behind me you can see the Times Square Police Department. I'm sitting in a chair provided by the city, and about, I'd say half a block from a gathering in honor of the Naked Cowboy. Now, the purpose for this, of course, is to introduce this week's presentation on blogging. And so I thought that it was time for me to experience some new technical stuff like video conferencing, which just won't exactly be a conference because I couldn't plan the times this week, but doing some of that stuff. So here we go.
For me, one of the more profound statements that Halaves makes is actually his very first sentence. He writes, "Scholars who blog are engaging in more than personal publishing. They are shaping a new third place for academic discourse, a space for developing the social networks that help drive the more visible institutions of research." And he comes back to this at the very end of the article with his talk about invisible colleges. And really he talks about these as the social circles that underlie the structures of institutions, and that the informal communication, especially the transparency of blogs, is going to challenge some of the normal structures and processes that have been understood to happen normally in institutions. And he's really, in general, very optimistic about that, and seems to be a bit utopian. He seems to believe that this is something that's part of the medium itself, not just a practice. It's a practice, but it's also built into the medium. He calls it a bias of the medium on page 118. And that got me thinking again about Frederick Jameson. And I swear, I really haven't thought about Frederick Jameson in about 10 years, but now I've thought about him twice this term. And he talks about something called a cultural dominant in postmodernism, or the cultural logic of late capitalism. And the cultural dominant, like the bias of the medium, are both ways of trying to avoid a sense of a determinism, sort of a final vulgar in the last instance. But both of them seem to want to argue that there's a powerful predisposition in the logic of a technology. And here I want you to think about technology in Foucault's sense, not just technology in the gizmo system sense. Foucault talks about technology, the two that I think matter quite a lot are the technology of the sign system and a technology of power. Technology of the sign system has to do with the ways in which symbolic interactions take place. And technologies of power have to do with deportment of the body. And both of those, it seems to me, are suggested in a cultural dominant and a bias of the medium, that something about the operation itself is going to affect both the science system and... I've brought this up a couple times, my discomfort about the utopic vision of collaboration, and I think it comes up with Halaves as well. He seems to think that transparency, with whatever drawback it has, is a highly regulatory system. But I would want us to think, if we're going to use transparency as our solvency mechanism, to think about how it is that transparency interacts with information overload, right? Transparency assumes that the more information you have, the better you can keep track of or keep tabs on anything shady that might be happening. And when you have too much information to keep track of altogether, having more of it by which to monitor activity is not necessarily going to operate the same way it does in other circumstances, right? So when you change the rules from scarcity to plenitude, you might not have the same operations of protection. The other quotation that I thought was important came in that same paragraph. He writes, "We are in the midst of a quiet, uneven revolution in academic discourse, and blogging and other forms of social computing make up an important part of that revolution." Now there's two components that I really thought made that quotation important. And the first is the unevenness of the revolution, And we've been talking about a digital revolution, yes or no, utopic, dystopic. And really, I think this is the first time where I've found this kind of helpful term, that in fact that it's an uneven resolution, that it can be both at once, back and forward. We can, make some steps ahead and some steps back, and that it's not going to be smooth, even, done, or complete. The second part of that I think is important, and really got me at least thinking in a different way, was the idea that it's a form of social computing. Now, we've talked about social networking, right? Different ways of connecting, but I hadn't thought about social computing quite the same way. I mean, it was in the back of my mind, but that term got me thinking a little bit, especially coupled with his idea of the invisible college, that the social computing is a new calculus, and it's a new calculus that's taking into account different combinations than have been possible before. And so, I don't know, that metaphor I thought was quite useful.
Things are what I like to do. Doing things is what I like to do. Things are what I like to do. No twiddling of thumbs, I get everything done. I'm slightly more productive now than previous because I'm slightly more efficient than I previously was. Doing things is what I like to do. Yes, doing things is what I like to do. Yes!
Okay, I could certainly have shown you a number of different blogs that are being actively participated in by academics. For example, here's Sounding Rhetoric, Paul Johnson's blog. Or I could have shown you Blogos, which is Deborah Hahi's blog. Eyesight, Jody Dean's, she's a political theorist, political scientist. The Rosewater Chronicles, which is Joss Gunn's. The group blog, Continental Philosophy, where people like Simon Critchley and Zizek participate. There's Doxastic Fantastic, which is Attila's blog. Dangerous and Loud, Dana Cloud. For you media fans out there, there's Differences and Repetitions, Ted Streifus's blog. Or one of the people we've read this term, Lawrence Lessig's blog. However, I thought it might be better for us to take a look at the inner workings of a community to see how some of the practical possibilities of making a blog actually be a social computing network come to pass.